My name is Eva Langston. I'm 27 years old, a speech-language pathologist by profession, and apparently the family disappointment. At least that's what it felt like last Thanksgiving. It's strange how a table full of people you share DNA with can make you feel like you don't exist. While the candles flickered on my aunt's ornate dining table and the scent of rosemary turkey floated through the air, not a single person made eye contact with me. Not even when I set down the bottle of red I'd brought, or when I quietly offered to help carve the ham. I had become a ghost in my own lineage. The problem started 2 years ago when I chose to quit law school. I wasn't failing not academically, but I was drowning emotionally. Panic attacks, sleepless nights, a crushing sense of dissonance. I knew I didn't want to spend my life buried under depositions and billable hours. I wanted to help people reclaim their voices literally. So I left Columbia Law, enrolled in a graduate program in speech-language pathology at NYU, and didn't look back. My family did. They looked back with scorn, especially my mother, who had dreamt of introducing me as the attorney in the family. Instead, she started telling people I was figuring things out. That phrase, figuring things out, it's what people say when they're too ashamed to tell the truth. No one ever asked me what I did now. No one asked who I'd helped, or what it meant to see a stroke patient say their child's name for the first time in months. I carried those triumphs in silence like medals I was too ashamed to wear. So here I was in a room full of relatives who talked over me, around me, and sometimes through me, but never to me. My cousin Daniel was going on about his tech startup's Series A. My sister Emily shared wedding plans and honeymoon options like she was pitching a Netflix rom-com. Even Grandpa, the man who used to sneak me chocolates and say I was too clever for this bunch, was silent. But I could tell. He wasn't well. He sat at the far end of the table, quiet and slow, chewing carefully, blinking like each second was a burden. His nurse, a petite woman in navy scrubs named Allison, stayed close. She smiled at everyone, including me. When my sister passed me the cranberry sauce, like she was handing it to the air, I swallowed the lump in my throat and stood. "I'll be back," I said softly. No one looked up. I walked out to the hallway and leaned against the wall, willing myself not to cry. It wasn't just the silence that hurt. It was the deliberate erasure, like they'd decided I didn't matter because I didn't fit their blueprint anymore. That was when I heard a gentle voice behind me. "Eva." I turned. It was Allison, Grandpa's nurse. She looked hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she should be speaking to me at all. I just wanted to say, "Your grandfather talks about you. A lot. Especially after your last visit." I blinked, surprised. "He does," she nodded. "You read to him from that therapy manual." He said. He felt his brain wake up. My heart twisted. No one in that house had thanked me for anything in years. But here was this stranger noticing. That night I sat in the guest room staring at my suitcase. I was scheduled to give a talk next week at the American Speech-Language Hearing Association conference. I'd been invited to present on a new rehabilitation method for post-stroke aphasia patients, a method I'd developed through months of trials and relentless failures. It had worked, it had changed lives, but somehow I still couldn't tell my family about it. Because when someone has already written your story, the dropout, the failure, the quitter, it's terrifying to ask them to read a new chapter. Still, something had shifted. Maybe it was Allison's words. Maybe it was Grandpa's unspoken eyes. But I knew one thing for sure. This ghost, she wasn't done speaking. 2 days after Thanksgiving, I stood backstage at the Sheraton Ballroom in downtown Boston, my hands trembling slightly as I adjusted the wireless mic clipped to my collar. The stage manager gave me a thumbs up. 10 minutes until I presented. The screen behind me bore the title of my talk, Neuroplastic Pathways, Restoring Language Function Post-Aphasia. I scanned the audience from the wings. Hundreds of clinicians, researchers, and healthcare executives filled the seats. The keynote speaker had been a neuropsychiatrist from Stanford. I was the closer, the wild card, the youngest face on the roster by nearly a decade. And no one in my family knew I was here. They thought I was still figuring things out, probably in my tiny apartment in Queens, eating instant noodles and applying for entry-level admin jobs. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the last 18 months trialing a new rhythmic speech retraining technique inspired by music therapy and neurolinguistic programming. I'd tested it with a cohort of 20 stroke survivors. 17 had regained significant verbal function. What they didn't know was that Harvard Medical's neurology team had asked for my research notes. What they didn't know was that the American Journal of SLP had just published my paper in its winter issue, the youngest lead author they'd featured in years. But the weight of their silence still pressed on me like a stone. I'd told myself I didn't care what my family thought, that I didn't need validation from people who'd once told me I was wasting my potential. But the truth was murkier. Part of me still wished someone, my mother, my sister, my grandfather, had said, "We're proud of you." I shook the thought away and stepped on stage. The lights were hot. The applause was polite. I began to speak. It started slow. I walked the audience through the neuroscience Broca's area, Wernicke's, the impact of lesion locations, the remapping of language centers post-injury. Then came the stories, real patients anonymized, who'd spoken their grandchildren's names again after weeks of silence. Some in tears. I showed video clips. One woman said, "Thank you for the first time in 5 years." The crowd hushed. And then the moment that would change everything, I revealed the core of the method, rhythm-based scripting paired with immersive conversation loops. I called it the echo method. When I finished, the silence was electric. Then, applause. Real applause. Standing ovation. Afterward, a woman from Johns Hopkins asked if I'd consider licensing the method. Another from a tech firm said they were working on an AI-enhanced therapy platform and wanted to integrate my approach. Someone else just hugged me and cried. But even as they surrounded me, shook my hand, gave me their cards, I kept thinking of my family. How they'd be sitting at home, maybe laughing over leftovers, maybe planning the next family gathering I wouldn't be invited to. And I wondered if they knew about today, would it even matter? That night, as I packed my laptop and stepped into the cold Boston air, I saw a message light blinking on my phone. A voicemail. From Allison, Grandpa's nurse. "Hi, Eva," her voice said gently. "It's about your grandfather. He asked me today if he'd get to hear you speak one more time. Like that day in the garden. He's not doing well, Eva, I think. He's holding on for you." My breath caught. I'd just spoken to hundreds of experts, changed the minds of decision makers, maybe even altered the course of treatment for thousands of patients. But the only voice I now longed to reach was one slipping away in a quiet room I hadn't visited enough. And for the first time in months, my knees buckled not from fear or pressure, but from the ache of something deeper than silence, regret. The next morning, I was on the first flight to Pennsylvania. I hadn't been back in over a year, maybe more. The town hadn't changed. Small diners with fogged-up windows, worn brick buildings lining Main Street trees, already bare from the early frost. But the air felt thinner, as if the silence I'd been running from had never left. It just waited like a patient ghost. I took a cab straight from the airport to the assisted living home. The nurse at the front desk smiled when I said his name. "He's been waiting," she whispered, her eyes soft. I braced myself before walking into room 214. There he was, grandfather, thinner, paler, but unmistakably him. His hair, once thick and silver, was almost gone. But those eyes, still steel blue, still sharp. He turned slowly, and when he saw me, something lit up behind his tired expression. He didn't speak. He just held out his hand. I stepped forward and gripped it. "I heard you gave a speech," he said, his voice raspy. I choked down a sob. "How do you always know?" He smiled faintly. "You always had something to say." We sat like that for a while. No accusations, no apologies, just presence. Then he said it. "Do you remember the garden?" I nodded. Of course I did. It was where I first practiced public speaking, on a rickety wooden bench, reading out loud from poetry books to an audience of birds, and my grandfather, who always clapped at the end. "Your voice changed then," he said. "You stopped hiding." It hit me like a punch. He remembered the moment I found my voice, the very voice my family had dismissed as too much, too ambitious, too serious. "They told me I was too loud," I murmured. "They were scared," he replied, "of how high you might climb." Then came the words I didn't know I needed, but I always knew. He whispered. "You weren't born to whisper." I cried shamelessly, quietly into his shoulder, like I was 5 again. That night, I stayed in a nearby motel. The room was cold, but my mind was burning. I thought of the upcoming family gathering, Grandpa's birthday. They were all going to be there, my parents, my sister, even her husband, who I hadn't seen since the wedding. where I was seated at the farthest corner of the reception hall like a forgotten cousin. They had no idea I was back, no idea what I'd accomplished. And for the first time, I wasn't coming to ask for a seat at the table. I was coming to speak, but not for them, not to impress them. I told myself I'd go for Grandpa, for the man who believed in my voice when it was barely a whisper. I would go to honor the echo of his hands clapping in the garden, not for the ones who only showed up to silence me. Not for my family, never again for them. I stood at the edge of the banquet hall watching. Everything looked the same. White linen tablecloths, silver balloons spelling out 85 in shiny chrome. A chocolate cake topped with sparklers waited under plastic wrap. Someone had even dragged out the old piano from the community room. My name wasn't on any place card. Of course it wasn't. I recognized the seating chart on the poster near the door. There were 32 names. My sister was at table 1, my brother at table 2, the businessmen, the married ones, the grandkids with good jobs. Even nieces I hadn't met yet had seats. But not me. Just like every Thanksgiving, every reunion, every ceremony where I was the afterthought. The one they called sensitive, difficult, independent, as if that was a flaw. And yet, here I was. I adjusted the lapel mic clipped beneath my blazer. The AV team, whom I'd called quietly the week before, was already queued up. My voice would carry through the speakers as soon as I stepped onto the stage. No one had noticed me yet. I made my way slowly toward the front, unnoticed like a ghost in the house I grew up in. But Grandpa saw me first. From across the room, he lit up. He clutched the arm of his nurse Elise and whispered something. Elise turned and smiled at me wide and knowing. It was Elise who gave me the platform. When Grandpa told her about the garden speeches, she emailed me. Asked if I would say a few words during the party. He'd like that, she wrote. He misses your voice. She didn't tell the family. Smart woman. I stepped onto the makeshift stage as chatter began to fade. A few heads turned. A cousin did a double take. My sister's mouth fell open, fork still in hand. A piece of steak paused midair. I took the mic. And then I spoke. Not to prove anything, not to perform, but to remind myself, and maybe a few others, what conviction sounds like when it's rooted in purpose, not approval. I started with Grandpa. I told stories of how he sat with me in the garden, reciting Maya Angelou, and listening like it was scripture. I described the way he encouraged me to read to birds, because every voice deserves a sky. I didn't say a word about tech startups or investor rounds. I didn't need to. Then something unexpected happened. Elise stood up. She interrupted gently but firmly. May I say something, she asked. My sister looked annoyed. My mother tilted her head in polite confusion. And then Elise said clear and bold, I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for her. Everyone turned. She gestured at me. You don't know this, but I was at a women's conference last year. A keynote speaker shared a story that made me leave a toxic marriage, go back to nursing school, and believe I was still worth saving. A pause. That speaker was her. Gasps rippled through the room. My sister's husband nearly dropped his wine glass. That's her app, he said under his breath. I caught it. So did others. Someone murmured, Wait, that's her. Suddenly people were checking phones, Googling. Faces changed. My aunt leaned over to my cousin. She's the founder of That Kind Voice. The shift was palpable. They hadn't known, because I hadn't told them. And now I didn't have to. I didn't expect applause, but that's what came. Not thunderous, not theatrical, just honest. A few slow claps at first from Elise, from Grandpa, and then it spread like a quiet wave. People weren't cheering for a show. They were recognizing a truth they hadn't known was sitting quietly among them. I stepped down from the stage, heart thudding in my chest, not from nerves, but from clarity. I wasn't angry anymore, just awake. My mother approached first, lipstick, perfect earrings swaying. Why didn't you tell us, she whispered, almost pleading. I smiled softly. Would you have listened? She flinched. Just slightly, but she didn't argue. Then my brother, James, still in his suit, still carrying that Wall Street swagger. So that's you, he said, trying to piece it together. You built the app. The one with what, 1 million users? 3.2, I replied calmly. He blinked. Holy, my sister was less subtle. She came over, eyes blazing with confusion and something else she wasn't ready to name. You spoke at TED. You were on Forbes. I didn't answer that. I didn't need to. She looked like she was seeing a stranger, no someone she'd chosen not to see. You let us believe, she began, and then stopped herself. Why didn't you correct us? That's when it hit me. They hadn't just ignored me. They'd needed me to stay small, needed a scapegoat, a contrast. I was the mirror they didn't want reflecting their insecurities. And maybe I let them. For a while, but not anymore. I stopped trying to prove my worth when I realized it was never going to be accepted currency in this family. I said, voice low but steady. I expected more defensiveness, maybe a scene, but instead silence hung heavy. And then Grandpa spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but every word landed like a gavel. She's always had it in her. You were just too busy judging the book by the wrong cover. Everyone turned. He was in his wheelchair, hands folded, looking more regal than frail. She taught me to breathe again when grief nearly took me under, he said. She didn't need applause then. She doesn't need it now. Tears pricked my eyes. This was the validation I hadn't known I needed, not from the room, but from the man who'd never stopped seeing me. Later, as dessert was served and conversations cautiously resumed, people kept glancing at me. Some came to say hello, some just nodded awkwardly respectful. But one person came and sat beside me quietly, sincerely. It was my cousin Melanie. You inspired me, she said. Your podcast, your words, I never connected the dots. I thought you were someone famous. I laughed. I am, just not to them. She smiled. Well, you are now. I didn't need their redemption, but I accepted the moment. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't in shouting your success. It's in letting your silence echo louder than their assumptions. I stayed behind after most guests had left. The room that had once buzzed with quiet judgment was now a still, echoing shell. Only the faint clatter of catering trays remained, and Grandpa waiting for me in the library just as he'd asked. When I walked in, the door clicked shut behind me like a seal breaking on a secret that had waited too long. He sat facing the window, fingers interlocked. The same hands that once taught me how to shuffle cards and repair a cracked birdhouse now trembled slightly with age but not weakness. I always knew you were meant for more, he said without turning. I just didn't know if you'd choose to come back. I sat across from him, suddenly a child again, and not. I wasn't sure either, I admitted. But you left the door open. He finally turned. Everyone wants to be seen, he said. You didn't just make them see you tonight, you made them see themselves. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I didn't plan it, I said. I didn't want revenge. No, he nodded. But you found something better. There was a pause. Then he reached into a small leather folder on the table and slid it toward me. I opened it and stared. It was his will, with a new amendment. I'm leaving the estate to a foundation you'll oversee, he said. One that funds underrepresented tech founders, kids who were told they'd never matter. I looked up sharply. Grandpa, you don't have to, I do, he interrupted. Because you didn't just survive them. You transcended them. That kind of wisdom, it deserves a legacy. I was speechless. For years I'd imagined proving myself to them. But this was something else. Does the family know? He chuckled. They will. I let out a breath. They'll hate me. No, he said. They'll fear you. Then respect you. Then maybe they'll learn something. Later that night, I stood outside looking up at the stars I used to wish on as a child. James found me there. He hesitated before speaking. I was a jerk, he admitted. I'm sorry, it wasn't an apology wrapped in excuses. Just real. I know, I said quietly. But it's okay now. He shook his head. It's not. But maybe someday it will be. That was enough. As I walked back inside, Melanie waved me over. A bunch of us were talking, she said. We want to help with the foundation, if you'll have us. It wasn't victory by dominance. It was leadership by grace. And that's when I understood. This wasn't just about reclaiming my voice. It was about choosing how I used it. 2 weeks later, I stood at the front of a sunlit auditorium, heart steady, voice calm. This wasn't a product pitch. This was launch day for the foundation. Rows of students, many barely older than I'd been when I was first dismissed, filled the room. Nervous energy hummed in the air. Some clutched resumes, others notebooks. They weren't here just to listen. They were here because they believed they could belong, maybe for the first time. Behind them sat reporters, investors, my old mentors. Even former colleagues who'd once overlooked me were now donors. and in the back row, quiet but present, was Grandpa, flanked by James, and yes, even my sister, who couldn't quite meet my eyes but was here. I stepped to the mic. I was told once that I didn't belong, that I didn't look the part, that my silence meant weakness, that I was a mistake. I paused, letting the air grow still. I believed them, for too long. I scanned the crowd and saw versions of myself in every seat. But today isn't about what they said. It's about what we do when we're told no, when we're made invisible. Today is about showing up anyway, loudly, proudly, unapologetically. Applause rose first, a ripple, then a wave. After the event, people came up one by one. A young woman said she never thought someone like her could belong in tech. A boy whispered, "I want to be like you someday." I smiled and bent down. Be better than me. As the sun dipped, casting golden light across the hallway, Grandpa approached. "You rewrote the story," he said. I nodded. "No, I just gave it a new ending." He reached into his pocket and pressed something into my palm. A small key. "I've kept your mother's journals. Her thoughts, her fears, her dreams for you. I think she'd want you to have them now." My breath caught. "She always knew you'd be the one to break the cycle." My fingers closed around the key, tears rising fast. "Thank you," I whispered. He pulled me into a hug. "No. Thank you for saving more than just this family's name. You saved its soul." That night I walked past the house I used to dread. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. I wasn't that girl anymore. I had found my way home, not through revenge, but through purpose. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt whole. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far our little storytelling family reaches across the world. If this story touched your heart or made you reflect, consider subscribing for more powerful narratives about strength, justice, and quiet resilience. We release a new story every week, and I promise they only get deeper. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and never stop